Hey, Larry, how you doing, man?
Great, Glenn. Great to be back with you.
It is good to have you back. This is Glenn Loury. This is the Glenn Show, formerly at bloggingheads.tv, now at glennlowry.substack.com, and at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/C/ Glenn Loury Show. Wherever you find your podcast, you can get the Glenn Show. You can subscribe. And if you subscribe, you get to hear what we do on Monday instead of Friday of each week, and you get to hear it without ads. So I encourage you to go to my Substack and to subscribe. I'm with Laurence Kotlikoff, professor of economics at Boston University, prolific author who has just published his 20th book that we will talk about. A dear friend of mine, best man at my wedding 4 years ago, as it happens, and frequent guest on the Glenn Show. So welcome back, Larry.
Thanks for having me again.
I couldn't help but have you. My friend puts out a book, everybody. It's called Money Magic: An Economist's Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. Larry is in the business of advising you, as he has been doing actually for some time. 20th book. Previous books include Getting What's Yours with Paul Solomon, in which he dissects the labyrinthine regulations and specifications of the Social Security system to make sure you know how to deal with that. And, Larry and I talk economics here often, so I'm glad to be able to help you promote the book, Larry.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that book, Get What's Yours. Also, Phil Mueller, a very well-known financial columnist, was a co-author. And
I beg your pardon. I didn't know it was three of you.
Yeah, three of us. And we tried to make it funny, so it turned into a national bestseller. Can you imagine a book about 2,728 rules becomes a number one bestseller for 11 days, and then for the whole year was in the top 10?
I can imagine it because what is it, about $1 trillion or so going out the door in Social Security and Medicare expenses every year. And there's a lot of people like me. I don't know about you, but I'm actually over 70 years old. There are a lot of us. And we got time on our hands, Larry.
Yeah.
We're numerous. We are relatively idle, and we have a huge financial stake.
Right. I recall I got you some free benefits, right? Some benefits you didn't know about.
Larry saved me, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars, because I didn't realize after my late wife, Linda Loury, the great Linda Loury, economist from Tufts University, my wife of 28 years and dear friend for more than 30 years, mother of my children, Glenn and Nehemiah, Linda Loury, passed away. And I did not know that I could claim Social Security death benefits for her until I actually got old enough to start claiming them on my own account.
Yeah, so, you took widow's benefits on her record once you reached full retirement age, and then you took your own benefit at a much higher number at 70.
That's correct. And that was tens of thousands of dollars. And thank you very much, Larry. It's been put to good use, I assure you.
I think you owe me at least lunch or breakfast, maybe.
Okay, my friend, I got to ask you, this is an interesting book. It's funny. It's written with a light touch. It is engaging. It's the kind of thing that you expect from Larry Kotlikoff, author of, what did you call it? Jimmy Stewart is Dead? Is that the title you gave to that book about banking? In other words, you remember It's a Wonderful Life. You remember that movie, everybody, where Jimmy Stewart plays the friendly community banker? Well, forget about it. Forget about it. That guy's gone. The community bank is not all that friendly. Larry made all of that financial crisis shenanigan stuff come to life in a very beautiful way. So more power to you, Larry.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think anybody knew who Jimmy Stewart was or what that title was all about, but it was definitely The Wonderful Life, and the idea that you got it exactly, that we can't rely on Jimmy Stewart's to be running our banking system. We got to be relying on Anthony Mazzillos, who aren't necessarily trustworthy.
As it certainly proved to be the case.
Yeah.
Anyway, Larry, I have to ask this question because, we academic economists are pretty prideful and pretty arrogant and some of us are even assholes. And we'll say he's wasting his time. It's pulp fiction. He's writing financial advice books for households about what to do with their mortgage. Whatever happened to economic science? Whatever happened to the serious exploration of the unsolved questions of the frontier of the discipline, blah, 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 blah. Sure, it might sell well, but Freakonomics sold well too, and that didn't really advance the frontier of the discipline either. Larry, how would you defend yourself against the sneering, dismissive criticism of some of your peers, which I'm sure you've heard before?
Well, I've done my homework. Personal finance is a big part of actually economic science, going back to the work of Irving Fisher in the 1920s. So we have a 100-year history of working on this topic as economists. There's been 11 Nobel Prizes awarded for the economics of finance, and I would say about 7 of those 11 have been about personal finance to a large extent. So the lessons of economics has not been conveyed to the public. So we have an obligation, I think, as economists, to do good, to help government figure out policies, and to help individuals figure out their own financial lives. And we haven't been, I think, delivering on that obligation. So when I went into economics as a grad student, I started out at the beginning of the book. I talk about in the preface about deciding whether or not to become a doctor or an economist, and I ran into a frog that I had to dissect, and he changed my mind. and But economics intrigued me because I thought we could do something. It was a field you could do some good. And then I realized that there was basically nobody telling the public all these secrets that economists have been developing for a century, theoretical secrets about finance, how to handle your finances, and then I also developed the software starting 29 years ago, a company that has this tool called Maxify Planner to actually help people figure out how to smooth their living standard, figure out what can they afford on an ongoing basis, their living standard, how to raise it, how to figure out what things, decisions like getting married or divorced or buying this big house is going to impact them in terms of their living standard, or retiring early. What's the price in terms of their living standard? And also, if you invest in risk, how much does your living standard move around through time? How much does it fan out if you invested risk? What's the upside? What's the downside? So all this stuff wasn't being conveyed. Wall Street had its methodology, but it's very much at odds with what economics recommends people do. So I thought I had an obligation to develop the software because I was developing it for my research, this kind of stuff. And then I said, well, let me make a software tool for the public. And we've been at it for 29 years. And but then I realized that not everybody has an inclination to run software. So I should take what I learned from the software, what I've learned from people like Bob Merton and Zvi Bodie and other top finance guys, and what 100 years of research has told us, and put it all together in the book, and let people just learn from the book what economics recommends.
Okay, so that was a response to my question about how you square delving into personal finance with your high-minded ambitions for being research economists.
Yeah.
And I'm translating you into there's a whole lot of knowledge in finance that's not available to the common man, but that's relevant to the management of the common man, woman's affairs. And you're going to translate this insight from the finance literature into practical advice for households. Do I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just the basic idea, the basic idea that you have some lifetime resources, human wealth, net wealth, you have some negative resources, taxes, you have some off the tops required spending on maybe alimony or college tuition, paying off your mortgage, obviously. So what's left is what you get to spend. And then the key thing is spending it in a way that you don't run out. That's what we're trying to do. Just like a squirrel is accumulating acorns for the winter, we want to have a smooth living standard per person to our maximum age of life. And Wall Street, in the financial tools that they have out there, are predicated on making you happy. The first question is, how much would you like to spend in retirement? That's the first question they ask. Not how much you have, not how much can you afford, but how much would you like to spend? My answer to that question is $1 billion a day. But anyway, people give answers. They set a target that's generally too high. And then the next thing that happens is that the financial advisor that's connected to these Wall Street firms says, well, let me figure out a method for you to invest such that you can make this target that has no connection to reality.
Yeah.
And then we're off running, setting people into risky securities where we can charge high fees.
Well,
That's the
excuse me for interrupting, Larry. I have no doubt that uh, the Carnival Act that I might find when I walk into a commercial financial advisory service, where they're basically it's a song and dance, it's a whatever. I mean, I will confess, I don't do a lot of personal management of my own little
right.
savings. I've turned it over to Fidelity. I know you object. I know Andy Weiss, our friend, objects. I know that I should, as an economist, be more responsible for the management of my funds, but man, I just, I don't feel like dealing with it, so I turn it over to Fidelity, and we go occasionally to these meetings with the investment advisory guy, and as an economist, I sit there and I listen to the various little algorithms that he runs me through, and he wants to show me charts on the screen, and he wants to tell me a story, and I realize it's a snow job. I realize I'm not getting a whole lot of value for it, but my recollection of serious finance theory and science, of the kind of thing that got a guy like Robert Merton or a guy like Franco Modigliani Nobel Prizes, was that it was much more subtle kind of equilibrium for now. What is the Modigliani-Miller theorem? Is this something like the value of the company doesn't depend on how much of the financing of the company is equity and how much of it is debt in an equilibrium thing? Or Merton's stuff about pricing options and these very clever dynamic programming arguments that he would develop, or even Schiller. It's much more of a, as I understand him, focused on measurement, but there was a systemic element to it where I'm interested in individuals interacting with each other in markets and how the arbitrage principles and how the information insights and whatnot affect the outcome of the interactions in markets. Whereas you're talking about, as I understand you, correct me if I'm wrong, merely solving a dynamic programming problem for an individual household. I'm not saying the computational exercise is not challenging. I'm saying the conceptual problems there are trivial is the word that these snooty theorists would use when they would sneer down at what you're doing. But I mean, is there any deep conceptual issue here, or is it all pretty much common sense?
No. There's deep work in finance that Merton. I mean, think about Merton and Samuelson's separate independent papers in '69. You may not be familiar with those, where they showed that
I'm not.
if you take standard what we call isoelastic utility function, standard preferences, that people should hold the same, and if everything were fungible, all their resources were fungible, they would want to have the same risk profile in terms of their total risk allocation of their total resources through time. So if you think about being able to swap all your future human wealth, all your future earnings into ready cash, all your future Social Security benefits into ready cash, so you had everything in just wealth right in your hands, how would you allocate that right now if you're 30? Well, maybe it's 30% stocks and 70% bonds. Just assume they're just two assets to keep it simple. Well, so what they both showed in separate papers in top journals, I think, the very top 5 journals, was that you'd want to keep that ratio fixed through time. As you age, you always want to have 30-70. And then when you take that principle and you say, okay, we don't actually have fungibility, so we can't, so we have to think about trying to get as close as possible to that ideal. And this is what Merton and Zvi Bodie and Bill Samuelson, Paul's son, wrote in a very famous paper. As you go through life, you want to try and arrange things so that you're always like 30-70 stocks to bonds. But you got to realize that your labor income may be more like a bond than a stock. If so, you already have a lot of bonds. And as you get into retirement, now you've got Social Security, which is a bond. And so one of the propositions is that if you're super rich, you want to hold bonds, not stocks, because you don't have a lot of Social Security. If let's say you're retired,
As a proportion of your overall income.
So I try to convey these lessons from that study. Now, here's another theoretical insight, which is just that stocks are a random walk. and that stocks are not safe in the long run because they are a random walk. Now, the financial markets or the financial industry is telling people that stocks are safe in the long run, but everything in finance says they're not. And everything we see from option theory and option pricing, if you want to try and buy insurance against stocks beating investing in tips and inflation index bonds uh, uh, out any date, the further out you go, the more expensive it is. That's from option pricing, and so there is a deep connection between real theory and what we can tell people that stocks are not safer, that they are risky, that we need to understand right now today that on a risk adjusted basis, the stock market is on a risk adjusted basis is paying you negative 11 basis points. That's what in 30-year tips, if you invest 30-year tips right now today, it's a negative 11 basis points.
What's the tips? I'm sorry.
Treasury inflation protected securities. So that, if we're thinking about, should I, for example, keep my money in stocks versus taking the money out and paying off my 4 percentage point mortgage. That's what mortgages are right now yielding, charging 4%. That's the current mortgage rate. If I can earn on a risk adjusted basis negative 11 basis points, whereas if I pay off on the mortgage, I can earn 4 percentage points. There's a huge argument.
Explain to everybody, including me, how it is that my investment in stocks is earning, what is this risk adjustment, is earning a negative return if you adjust for risk. Explain that, because it doesn't feel like a negative return to me.
Well, on average, stocks are doing, do quite well over, they do well on average, but they have got a huge standard deviation. I mean, the market's dropped 10%, I think, just in the last month or so.
But it's up over 30,000, right? I mean, it was like at 16,000 in 2016 when Trump won that election. I mean, that looks like a doubling in 5 years. What am I missing?
Well, there have been periods where it's gone up. It also fell 86% from 29 to 33. It fell 50% from 2000 to 2002. In 2008, it fell 53% between 2008 and middle of 2009. So, yes, it goes up. Yes, it goes down. When you're selling, right now today, you've got people that are investing in stock and they're also investing in tips, and the differential, the tips are safe. So on a risk-adjusted basis, to go from something that's risky and has a high average return to something safe, you end up with 11 basis points as a safe return. That's the risk. Just like, what is the price of an orange measured in terms of apples? It's just, we look at the two prices. Here the two prices are right there on the marketplace, right in front of us. But people don't get that. That's, this is why it's
Treasury inflation protected securities. How are they safe? I'm really in the dark. I'm sorry.
Treasury inflation. Yeah, since Larry Summers, our colleague in economics, when he was Treasury Secretary for like 4 months or 6 months, he was, at the end of Clinton
administration. At the end of the Clinton administration, after his mentor, the Citibank guy, stepped aside.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll think of it, Bob somebody. Who has a lot more money than you or I will ever have.
How do we forget his name? He'll come back to us. Anyway, he got him the job, and he's Larry was the Treasury Secretary and also the Under Treasury Secretary before that, and he put this into place, fortunately. And so now you can invest in an inflation-protected manner, but because things are so risky out there with respect to the stock market, people are willing to get a negative return for sure over the next 30 years. If you invest for the next 5 years in tips, it's a bit like a negative 1 percentage point return, or negative 2%. So the stock market is really risky. Otherwise, nobody would be buying these safe securities and getting for sure something negative. So this is why I'm trying to get people to understand, to make these comparisons between. I'm saying, look, if you've got an IRA that's taxable and you're maybe 63 and you've got the money in the stock market, you're earning on an inflation adjusted basis, on a safe basis, negative 11 basis points. If you can take that money out of your IRA, pay taxes on it, and pay off your student loan that's charging you 5-7%, there's still a lot of people in their 60s paying off their student loans, or your credit card at 18%. This is a no-brainer. You want to move the money out of the stock market, out of your IRA, pay off the taxes, potentially, it depends on what tax bracket you're in. This is not true for everybody. But I give an example where a typical middle-class household can earn $100,000 by making that move. And that's by running the software. This is not a book about the software. It's a book about examples. But it's also not just about high finance. It's about, there's chapters that are called Don't Borrow for College. I talk about the big scam involved in borrowing for college.
Hold on a minute. Yeah, before you go on, I just want to make sure we understand the nature of this recommendation to cash in some of your retirement savings and use it to get out of debt if you have student loans. I assume it applies to credit card debt, which is much more expensive. And
Right.
certainly, what about the mortgage debt that you might be holding because you owe $100,000 on your house or whatever? And it sounds to me like almost no matter what the interest rate is on the debt, unless it were negative, you should retire that debt if you have significant assets. You're saying that depends on the tax bracket because when you redeem the IRA, you have to pay the deferred taxes on it. And if you're in a high bracket, the calculation will be a little bit different. Um,
Right.
and it doesn't have any impact on the risk, or does it on the risk benefit calculation on the relative balancing of the individual's portfolio? Should they sell both stocks or bonds or both when they make this transaction?
Well, you want to, if you're, you have to realize that if you've got a debt and you've got the ability to pay it off, and you aren't doing that, and you leave the money in the stock market, what you really have to understand is that you have borrowed to invest in the stock market. Because if you did pay it off, then would you ask yourself the question: would I actively go out, borrow money on my house to put it in the stock market? Most Americans wouldn't do that. So I'm trying to give kind of economic logic. Every place comes, whether we're talking about divorce. There's a chapter about a divorce like an economist. There's a chapter called My Daughter the Plumber, which is trying to look at careers and the fact that doctors make a lot of doctors make less than plumbers over the lifetime. And
Okay, you got everything but the kitchen sink in there, and I still want to focus on
okay, sure.
selling shares and my IRA and using the money to
Yeah.
retire debt. It's a real insight. It's a real insight to observe to somebody holding debt and holding these assets for your retirement at the same time is the equivalent of borrowing money in order to invest in the stock market, because you could always retire the debt with the money that you have in the stock market. So in effect, you're holding debt so that you can have more money in the stock market. That is, you're borrowing to invest in the stock market. It's a very easy tautology, but it does actually change the way that a person might feel about how to handle their money. So I think that's
and the Fidelity
an
broker,
insight.
the Fidelity guy who wants to have you stay in the stock market so he can charge fees, is not going to tell you this. Okay, this is the advantage of having an economist who's not got some product to sell you, giving this information across. We do have a amount of insight that we just haven't shared. We've been like monks, we economists, in our little cloisters. We have all this knowledge about finance, about personal finance, and we haven't been sharing it.
Well, let me ask you about something else that actually relates to my own personal finance, which is I've got a friend who's an insurance salesman.
Mm-hmm.
He's an insurance agent. He wants me to buy life insurance. He wants me, and then I haven't bought anything yet. And he shows me all these complicated plans about the life insurance and whole life insurance, and you can redeem it, and you get 80% and 20, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I should not use life insurance as an investment vehicle. This is what I'm thinking to myself. I shouldn't use it as a way of what should be the protocol that determines whether or not a guy like me who gets a term insurance coverage that comes as a benefit with my job, I have to pay for it, but it's pretty standardized and pretty cheap. I can always self-insure by holding money in, the bank that for my wife if I should expire, my children or whatever. What are you saying? I know you must be saying something. I confess I haven't read every chapter of the book, Larry. I'm sorry, but
Life insurance, we
yeah,
buy car insurance to insure our car. If we total our car, we buy health insurance against our health. We buy life insurance to insure our labor income. When we're older and we have less labor income, we don't need life insurance. And the other overriding rule here is anything that's complicated, you do not want to get near, financially speaking. Anything that's not plain as pie, simple and straightforward that you understand, you're being swindled. And even if it's your best friend, because your life insurance agent might be a lovely guy, he does not understand the product he's selling, I'm sure, because it's that complicated. I've seen these products, they've talked to me about it. It would take me a month to figure it out. I have to write my own dynamic programming tool to figure out what exactly, how much I would be screwed if I bought this thing. They have very subtle ways of screwing you. So if it's very simple term life insurance, then it's straightforward. If it's a simple annuity product, it's a single life policy or joint survivor policy, it's one thing. But if it's a very complicated policy, stay away. I mean, I talk about, the government's involved in selling scammy products like reverse mortgages. The government's heavily involved in reverse mortgages to I think, scam the elderly into buying these things through the banking system, to try and get to untrap their equity, because their baby boomers are coming into retirement with far too little money, with money for only like 3 years of spending in terms of their assets. And then they've got a house. And then the government is trying to help them out of their house in the form of, let's figure out a way where you can borrow against your house value, take out a good chunk of the equity,
yeah.
and hey, guess what? If you never die, if you never leave the house, if you stay in the house, we're never going to ask for a penny back. We're going to give you some money. You'll get to spend it. But what they don't tell you, and this is a government-run program uh, called a HECM loan, what they don't tell you is if you have to move in 5 years, you're going to have to pay back what they gave you at a huge interest rate. Plus, there's like 15 different fees that they're going to charge interest on those that you have to repay. And then they're going to say, well, don't worry, we'll let you take out another one of these loans. But if you have to move several times, you will end up on the street. Uh, Basically, it's just
Wait a minute.
terrible. Yeah.
You're saying that these reverse mortgage products that are being offered, I see them on television every night practically,
Yeah.
are a scam, and you're breaking that down.
I think they're a scam. I go through them in some detail in the book. And there are many other ways to deal with trapped equity than I mean, you lose 50 cents on the dollar. What I'm trying to get across in general in this book.
Well, hold on a minute. Just let me be clear on this, Larry. It all depends on the terms at which the transaction would be carried out. I mean, there's an implicit swindle in there because they're cashing you out. You have equity in the house. They're going to provide it to you now, but they're doing it on terms that are inferior to what you might be able to get if you didn't do that. So that's the reason not to use it, right?
Yeah, that's the reason. Yeah. And so one of the main themes of this book is there's so many ways to improve your living standard, to get more money safely without any risk whatsoever before you even start thinking about stocks versus bonds. Look, I probably, just in a conversation, made you $75,000 with that, widow's benefit information. If we talked about, uh, paying off a mortgage at a high rate where you're on a safe basis, that could, in the example in the book, it was like $75,000 for the particular person that I took made it as an example. There's downsizing your home. There's moving to Texas where there's no state income tax from California where the top rate's 13%. There's all these things you can do, annuitizing your with retirement withdrawals with a reliable insurance company, and then maybe taking out a bigger mortgage to deal with the inflation risk. Because I'm not, anti Mortgages should be paid off in a low inflation environment, but in a high inflation environment, they are a great hedge against inflation. So I want to make clear that if you took out money on a mortgage and used it to buy an annuity, you'd have in effect an inflation indexed annuity, because if inflation takes off, you lose money on the annuity, but you gain money on the mortgage because you pay back the mortgage in watered down dollars. So lots of things. I'm talking about a whole range of ways to safely raise your it's the title is An Economist's Secrets. The subtitle: An Economist's Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life. And better life is really making lifestyle decisions that you price out based on how much it's going to impact your living standards. So if I'm thinking about divorcing Sam here, who I hate to the tune of 20% of my living standard, meaning that if I could leave Sam and it wouldn't cost me more than 20% of my living standard, if it only cost me 10%, I'm out the door. But if it's going to cost me 30%, I'm going to stick it out with Sam. He's not worth giving up 30% of my living standard for the rest of my life. That's the way we have to think, very hard-nosed and cold. We economists are just, are hard-nosed people.
No, I get it. I'm contemplating divorce. The question is, what's it going to cost me? And then the question is, what am I willing to pay to be divorced? And if it costs me more than I'm willing to pay, I should stick it out. And you're asking a person to think like an economist and to do that calculation rather than to just act on emotion and then realize after the fact that they paid way more than they were willing to pay to be out of a relationship. And I don't have a problem with that. I suppose there are people who would, that you've crassly reduced to numbers, something that should be a matter of, morals or something like that. Divorce is not something that we should just trade over the counter. There's something sacred or something like that. But I'm not that guy. I'm your economist colleague. So you're advising me against purchasing whole life insurance under any circumstances.
Unless you run it by me first, the policy. But I'm sure it's going to be far too.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's going to be worth it.
It's got all these gimmicks in there about how it'll be worth this much when you die, or if you decide that you want to cash it in, you can get this percentage. Then they've got different columns where there are different packages of you get 80% or 60% or 30%. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the implicit cost of the insurance was.
Think about, they have student loans. Talk about government scams. The federal government is making basically all the loans to students at a high interest rate. You can't refinance at a lower rate. You can't get out from under these loans by going bankrupt. You can't discharge them in bankruptcy. They will come after you if you're 99 and you haven't paid your student loans, and there are people 99 haven't paid them off. They will take it out of your Social Security check every month. This is Uncle Sam at his nastiest. And then they have these repayment schemes. Some are income related. They're so complicated. You, again, would need a supercomputer to figure out what's best. So I talk about what to avoid when it comes, first of all, I have a chapter called Don't Borrow for College. I talk about the ways in which you can get a terrific college degree on the cheap from a place like Stanford, just using online courses. Think about if you want to get a job with IBM, and you don't want to, and you cannot afford Stanford, Harvard, Yale, whatever, Oberlin College, where my sons went, where it's very expensive. Well, take 20 online courses from those places on the cheap, get a certificate, get a grade for the online course, and then go to your community college for $6,000 a year, or say $10,000. Get a job at McDonald's to pay that. Don't borrow. And then when it comes to graduating and applying for the quantum computing job at IBM, send them the 20 certificates of these courses and see how well you do against the Williams College graduate who is majored in English and is applying for the same job. They are going to hire you, not that college graduate who's walking out the door with a major in English, wanted to do English, borrowed $300,000, he and his parents, and cannot afford to do English, be an English professor or an English teacher in high school, because he's got $300,000 in debt. People are borrowing.
I don't know whether the employer is going to read the stapled together certificates in the same way that he'd read a Stanford degree? That's an empirical question, right?
Well,
Whether employers will value I mean, objectively they should do so, but the Stanford reputation and all of that.
but it's
But
a certificate from Stanford. I mean,
yeah,
it's an online course being given at Stanford. I would think they would, and it's a grade, and it's $700 for the course,
yeah.
and it's out there. Okay, this is a way. This you want to go to college to a
Well,
top
I
school.
mean, somehow I'm doubting that arbitrage opportunity is quite as simple because Stanford has chosen through its massive online course program to make these courses available. If indeed they thought that you could arbitrage them in the way that that you described by taking those courses online and then presenting certificates, they'd be undercutting their own market, wouldn't they?
Well, I think what Stanford's doing is partly arranging marriages. People from a certain, class of, the rich parents sending their kids to Stanford so they can meet other kids from other rich parents and uh, and preserve their wealth and whatever. That's part of what's going on here.
Well, let me. I mean, you put it in humorous terms. There are many social connections to be acquired by attending selective and elite schools. Some of them have to do with romance and marital relations. Some of them have to do with business partnerships or fraternities that you might join, which
Right,
benefits you then down the stream. And part of what you gain when you show up at one of these exclusive $60,000 a year outfits is the ability to mingle with other people similarly selected and to form bonds with them that may benefit you later in life. That can be true, and it might be not inefficient, Larry. It might be that we need to have some kind of matching service because the associations between people are productive in and of themselves. They have to be able to find each other somehow.
right. No, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of reasons people go to these elite schools that have nothing to do with real education. And also, there's the evidence is that if you go to an elite school, that Harvard collects hardworking kids and kids that are talented. It doesn't really make them hardworking or make them talented. And there's been studies by economists that show that the value added of going to Harvard versus Wake Forest, conditional on kids' performance in high school. There's no value, no clear value added. It's just the connections, and the connections are only going to last you so long. You're going to wear your Harvard, as I describe in the book. You can take your Harvard sweater, it says Harvard all over it. I went to Harvard. You taught Harvard. You went to MIT. So nothing against Harvard per se. Okay, but you can wear your Harvard sweater maybe to your first job or two, but then you'll become a laughing stock if you're wearing this in the summer, the Harvard sweater, and it's not going to take you through your career. Well, I know lots of kids who went to Harvard and didn't end up great successes. I know kids in my grad school didn't get through grad school
Let me ask you a different kind of question. So we're both professor
because
of
they
economics.
didn't know how to work. They didn't have the ability, the discipline to work. That's the real thing that matters in life in terms of making a success of yourself is
Well,
hard work.
I didn't want
I,
to step on your punchline. The punchline here is that hard work and character are what's important, not pedigree and
yeah,
elite stamp on the forehead. I'm one of the ones who got in the Brown. There are 32,000 applicants for 1,600 slots. You've got a 1 in 20 chance of getting in. I got in. He says that's not what matters. What matters is whether or not you have grit, whether or not you know how to deal with adversity, whether or not you can apply yourself consistently over time to develop skills and to produce value. And that's not well proxied by the pedigree. Do I get you right, Larry?
absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
um, I was going to say we're both teaching graduate students in economics programs, PhD programs. My impression is that you take the top 20, top 25 schools. Let me include Brown and BU in the top 25 graduate programs in America. I think I can do that without too much risk.
Yeah.
Does it matter whether you're in the top 5 or the 20 to 25 in terms of the value of your degree? Not just in the marketplace, but also the objective signal about quality that degree confers. Here I've got somebody coming out near the top of their class from MIT or Stanford or Brown. Here I've got somebody coming out near the top of their class from the University of Vermont. Do I care? I'm trying to apply your maxim now to a different venue, not four-year undergraduate colleges, but the training of professionals to, in this case, do research in economics.
I think there might be some signaling that this person had to compete against other people, that he was more assiduous, more creative at different levels through high school, that got into better college, did better in college, did well in grad school. And so, there are people that have, that ability to be creative and diligent, but whether that person became more creative because he had these particular professors at the University of Chicago versus what he would have had at Michigan State University, I don't believe it. I think people's creativity is somehow, we don't know, God-given, if you like, and their discipline is probably based on what they, experience through life, their parental influence. I don't know. What do you think? I don't have an answer for this.
No, I think it's a difficult problem. I think measuring, I was just going on to talk about citation indices and how you measure the productivity and the influence of a scholar and who's a good economist and who's not. And I wouldn't just say someone has tenure at Harvard, they must be better than someone who has tenure at the University of Illinois because Harvard is a more distinguished department. On the other hand, if I went and saw Andre Schleifer had 200,000 citations over a 25-year career, and another person had 2,500 citations over the same period, or if I saw that the articles that were published were in the most highly sought after journals in the profession, Econometrica, American Economic Review, et cetera, whereas the other person's articles were published in less prestigious journals, measuring the prestige of a journal, again, in terms of reference to how influential are the articles published there, et cetera. I don't want to take the nihilistic position that there's no way of making discriminations amongst these people, but I grant that any mechanism used to make those discriminations is likely to be subject to criticism, is going to have a subjective element to it, or whatever. But I would be against the position that let's scrap meritocracy because it's all a shell game and pretty much everybody is operating on the same plane. I think there are gradations that can be discerned. So, for example, I know when I'm sitting in a seminar and somebody is giving a lecture that I'm listening to somebody who's really, really sharp based on the way they respond to questions, based on the seeming quality of their mind, the depth of the subtlety of their insight, the quickness with which they're able to grapple with complex matters, the clarity of their vision, the erudition that they bring to the enterprise because they're aware of all these literatures and they can combine it. I know when I'm in the presence of greatness, it's not evenly distributed across the world or across the institutions or whatever.
A lot of that greatness came from hard work. A lot of it came from luck. A lot of it came from just luck of genes, or luck of, I don't know what it was, that just some. Albert Einstein went to, I think, the University of Basel. Well, I think he thought his professors were idiots. He did basically all his work on his own. Now, clearly, he was a genius and transformed the world in a zillion ways. We got nuclear energy because of him. But did he need to borrow so much money that he couldn't become a physicist? That would have been a terrible thing. If he.
Okay, so let's move out of the realm of the esoteric academic stuff. What do you think about the forgiving of student loans legislation that would have the federal government? Because you were very critical of the student loan program, saddling students even into their 80s and 90s with debt that's a bad deal. What do you think about the proposal to retire those debts at the general taxpayer's expense through a massive program of the forgiving of student loans, which is very popular on the left? Bernie Sanders likes that.
Yeah. Okay. I will. I'll answer that. let me just say, Bob Rubin was the,
Yeah, that's the guy, Bob Rubin, indeed.
yeah. So just to be clear, the, I think the government should lend money to students at the same rate that it's borrowing money long term. So the long term Treasury bond rate is around 2 percentage points right now. So
Excuse me, you're not answering the question, but I'm asking. There's a specific proposal.
no, I would not forgive loans because there's too much. That would lead to too much inequality. Because somebody just paid off their loan, somebody has been maintaining their loan. It would just be crazy unequal treatment. But I think going forward, we should let people borrow at the government borrowing rate, long-term borrowing rate. We should let people default who go bankrupt on the loan just be treated like any other loan that you take out in bankruptcy. We should let people refinance their existing student loans at the government long-term bond rate. This is what I propose. Now, why you might say, okay, the default rate on student loans is going to be higher than on other loans. Why should the government let people borrow at this rate where they know there's going to be default? Well, so the government will probably lose money on this thing, but it's going to help educate the population. So we're going to make the entire population more productive, and therefore we're going to get more output and more tax revenue. So it's going to pay for itself. It's why do we have public schools? It's because it's a public good. And college is really a public good. So we want to help people get college educated, get a higher education, not just college. They should borrow money for trade school, for apprentice
Yeah,
school,
I was about to make that point.
for anything where they can improve themselves, for hairdresser school, any of these things that's education based, event or trade based, human
Let's pursue
based.
this a little bit because there is some economics here. I mean, why would you want to subsidize loans to people to make human capital investments, that is, investments that would enhance their productivity later in life, like going to college or going to a trade school? Why would you want to even have a loan program? Answer is that people, if without the government intervention to promote the access to capital of people who want to make these investments, the private credit market would not adequately serve this need. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I more or less learned this from you about, when you wrote your classic paper about intergenerational inequity, the fact that kids who are born without the ability, the wherewithal to get into college because they don't have the capital market available to borrow to get an education, and they have less money that they accumulate, they leave less to their kids. So this just perpetuates itself through time. And you need money. Money helps you also get educated. You can hire tutors. You can go to special camps in the summer where you learn things, math camps. So
Larry is making reference, everybody, in case you're interested, to my PhD dissertation in 1976 and to the classic article from that dissertation that was published in Econometrica in 1981. The main point of which is the following, I can say very quickly. If investments in the earnings potential of young people is constrained by their parents' income, rich kids and poor kids are not on an even playing field. The poor kids' parents don't have enough money to underwrite the cost of increasing their productivity by sending them to college or whatever. The rich kids' parents do. Now, if you assume rich and poor kids are pretty much a random draw on the distribution of ability, that's not the rich kids are not smarter than the poor kids, then you really like for the rich kids' parents to be able to invest a little bit in the poor kids' education. But we don't have a good way of doing that. Financial intermediation in that regard doesn't work because of various kinds of moral hazard and adverse selection problems that we could go into. Therefore, the government could step in. Although, because of the default rate, this was the thing that got me to thinking about this. The default rate on student loans is higher. Why should that be? Is the investment riskier? They're taking on a loan in order to finance acquiring a college education, and then they'll be able to pay off the loan if they earn enough. But some of them might not earn enough. Is that the point? They might be unemployed, or they might otherwise find hardships that prevent them from being able to realize the potential of that investment. So it's a bad investment and it fails and they default on the loan. And that's a higher rate of happening for student loans than it is for other kind of loans. How can you account for that?
Well, I think we just look at some of your other writings about discrimination in the market, and how this becomes ingrained, and how people's perceptions can lead to an equilibrium where they're not, they're being discounted before they even have a chance to prove themselves.
Do you mean
And
minorities or women or
parties, parties. And so I think if we just put all your work together, you have the answer. I was so impressed by that paper you wrote. I don't think I ever met you before I hired you. Do you think we met before I hired you from
He loves
BU?
saying that. He hired me. The Department of Economics at Boston University in 1991 appointed me. Larry was chairman of the department. There was a guy called John Silber who was the president of the university. He probably goes around telling people, of course he doesn't because he's dead now. May he rest in peace. Probably used to go around telling people that he hired me. Actually, you don't have a boss in the university, everybody. But yeah, Larry was the chairman, and it was his idea that I come across the river from Harvard
I told Silver to hire you, so I think I'm going to take credit. Okay. He didn't know it might even be available. I was the one who picked up the phone and called you. We put together a letter. I took it to Silver. He said yes.
And well, I'm very glad that happened because those were 14 very good years at Boston University. But you were saying that my papers were great when I interrupted.
And I don't think it's due to your professors at MIT. I think, or Northwestern, where you went to college, right? I don't think that somehow you have some fantastic talent, you have some discipline, you have something that didn't require you going to those schools. You would have excelled no matter what. And thank God you got into academia, because you are fantastic as an academic.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will tell this much of a story. I was at Northwestern, and we were out there in the Midwest, and there was something of an inferiority complex in those years of places like Northwestern and Minnesota and Carnegie Mellon and whatnot, the kind of Midwest, relative to the Princetons and Yales and Harvards of the world, who were or at least thought themselves on a different plane. And I remember showing up. I was an undergraduate at Northwestern 72 to 76. And then I went back as an assistant professor 70 to 72. And then I went back as an assistant professor in 76 after finishing my degree at MIT. And I was all full of MIT bluster and Paul Samuelson stuff and Bob Solo stuff and whatnot. And these guys were like Leonid Hurwitz. You remember Leonid Hurwitz? And guys like Groves and Ledyard. Now, these names don't mean anything to anybody now, but they were working on mechanism design and information economics, and they were doing really very creative and innovative research, which has subsequently blossomed into a lot of Nobel Prizes and a lot of real profound advances. I mean, people like Paul Milgram and Bengt Holmstrom and were assistant professors and those early in their career at that university, and they've all had spectacularly successful careers.
John Ledyard went to Purdue, because I remember meeting John Ledyard. He's an extremely impressive guy. Brilliant theorist. And so I remember him telling me he went to Purdue. I hadn't really known too much about Purdue. I was kind of shocked. Well, why wasn't it one of the top 10 departments that you went to? How could you be this good having not gone to one of the top 10 departments? It just struck me as bizarre. And then it dawned on me, this was John Ledyard. It wasn't MIT or Harvard or Stanford. Wherever he went, he was going to be John Ledyard in terms of his. It wasn't made. It was somehow born. He made it himself. He was self-made. I think we're all self-made people on some level. We can't rely, and that's why we have to.
We lost Larry there for a minute for technical reasons. He's back, and we've come back just so as to sign off of this very exciting discussion with Laurence Kotlikoff about his book. My room has become very dark. Hold on just a minute. We're signing off, but I just have to take a moment. We've been talking about Larry's book, Money Magic, in which he takes all this great wisdom from a 40-year career as a research economist in finance and he applies it to the problem of managing our personal finances with great insight and creativity. So everybody should buy his book. Larry is my friend. I'm glad to be able to talk with him, but we're going to call the conversation to a close. Not having dealt with the issue of inflation, Larry, maybe we should make that something that we talk about the next time we talk.
It's a very interesting topic for sure.
Yeah. But thanks a lot to Larry Kotlikoff for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Glenn. We'll do it a zillion times more.